At a crosswalk on a crowded street in Seoul, a young boy was walking in the middle of the crowd, texting along the way with his parents, who invited him to Junho's birthday party. But he declined the invitation, saying he was scheduled to meet a friend. Then they texted him to at least buy a gift and give it to him when he could come. He then went into a dialogue with the friend. The one asked him, calling him by his name Park Soo-ho, where he was now, as he had been waiting for him at the computer club for quite some time. Soo-ho apologized to his friend by texting that he wouldn't come today. The latter continued to persuade him by promising to buy ramen, but the young man replied that they would meet tomorrow, and now he was thinking about what gift to buy for Junho. While he was looking at his phone, he accidentally bumped into a man who called him a jerk. He apologized, but in his mind he was saying to himself that his mood was already at 0, so he also crashed into a man. It was not a good day. While Soo-ho was pondering what Junho might like, and continued to cross the long crossing, along with the other people, he felt first an earthquake, and then strange sounds. From the dark sky, a huge bolt of lightning crashed into the ground, and then there was an explosion, destroying the road. Then more lightning began to fall, destroying high-rise buildings. People began to run in panic, abandoning their cars, afraid to die from the debris and fires. Soo-ho ran toward the direction where the girl was screaming for help and told her to run after him. He then ran down the road as suddenly a large truck hit him. At that moment, his consciousness felt a strong pressure, and another lightning bolt flashed in front of his eyes in the night sky. He already thought he was dead when he woke up in the forest, looking up at the night sky. His naked body was shrouded in grass, and vultures were already flying in circles overhead, about to feed on him. He didn't realize how he had ended up in the forest, but it looked truly fabulous. Suddenly, he came to a clearing where a poor bear was trying to escape from an attack of wolves, who were biting the wolf in a pack, trying to devour him. All this story had to listen to the doctor, who at the end asked how Soo-ho was able to return from this forest back. But he did not answer, although he actually met a small snow-white wolf cub while he was watching the battle of the predators. After meeting the wolf cub, he ran away. He ran all the next day, and did not stop running until he was completely weak. It seemed that the forest was boundless, and there were no people around at all. He fell to the ground, and saw the fruits of the fruit lying in the grass. Soo-ho didn't know if they were poisonous, but when he saw that one of the fruits was being eaten by a swarm of ants, he began to eat greedily. While he was eating the fruit, a huge white snake crawled out of the thicket, which was already opening its mouth to swallow the guy. But at that moment it was bitten and dragged underwater by a giant toad. This world was more and more amazing, and the young man thought that he went crazy. Afterward he fell asleep, and when it rained, he was able to drink a drop of fresh water. It had been 67 days since he had entered this forest, and he really had no edge, and there was no civilization anywhere. He was able to fashion himself a loincloth, and resigned to his fate, he began to adapt to the conditions of his new life. A pack of wolves continued to hunt him, and he worried that one day they would catch up with him, and the only way out was to flee from them in the trees. Then a year passed from the beginning of his stay in these places, and he learned to extract huge bananas, a little smaller than his height. After taking one such banana off a branch, he could feed on it for days, and when he began to eat it, he realized that a new danger had appeared in front of him, namely, giant gorillas. One such ape attacked him, but when he dodged it by grabbing a liana, the gorilla fell to the ground along with the tree, causing a splinter in the paw of the white wolf cub, who had always followed the man since the moment he met him. The monkey struck the pup, and then Soo-ho attacked him by jumping down from the vines and stabbing the giant in the eye with a sharpened stick. The beast's paws grabbed the man and tossed him aside. He hit a rock, and blood spurted from his head. He began to feel weakness in his body, and now he was sure he was dying. The doctor asked him why he had done that then, and the young man replied that he could no longer avoid fighting over territory, for it was not an easy problem to escape from. For wherever you go, there will be a ruler. The enraged monkey wanted to finish the man off, but at that moment a big white wolf sank its teeth into the gorilla, and then the other red wolves came running. They killed the gorilla and didn't touch Soo-ho, thinking that he was trying to save the wolf cub. As it turned out, the white pup was the son of the leader of the red wolf pack, and from then on, they began to walk side by side with the man. He practiced running with the pack to get faster, and even sometimes carried a wolf cub in his arms until it grew up. Eventually, they accepted him fully into their pack. 2 years passed, and he had already forgotten human habits, howling at the moon with the beasts. Before he knew it, 31 years of his life in the forest had passed, but his body had not aged. He was still young and strong, and he hunted for the benefit of the pack, skillfully killing other huge beasts. From animal skins, he made himself extra clothing that served as his armor, and sharpened a large knife that he carried on his belt. Together they killed snakes and boars, and he was an aerial attacker, thus helping the wolves, for he could climb rocks and trees. Then 120 years passed, and he was still just as young, and to the end he was convinced that he was on another planet, where there was no human civilization yet. As he fought for territory, he not only made new friends, but buried old ones who died in battle or in combat, and he was the only one who could not die. Soon, when more than 200 years had passed, he lost count of the days and months altogether. He was over 500 years old when the Great War for the territories of the wolves against the gorillas began, when both species of animals had multiplied to the size of thousands of individuals and went column upon column. It was in that battle, when he was attacking the apes, that he felt the pressure in his head again. At this moment, in the Seoul Station area, at the crossing, a group of researchers were trying to find traces of the past disaster when strange lightning bolts rained down from the sky, completely destroying the place, leaving behind only abandoned ruins of buildings. The spatial energy readings went beyond normal when they reached the red dot on the coordinates. They sent the data to the portal control team, and then a gate to another dimension opened in space, and while waiting for the monsters to come out, the research team was surprised to see a human. Suho fell down without strength after moving through the portal. During the teleportation, his clothes were once again burned away on him, and he was completely naked. The girl leading the squad sensed the predator energy from him, and then ordered the others to send the repatriate to the center for examinations and rehabilitation. It was there, having remembered human speech, that the young man recounted his wanderings to the doctor. The man told the patient that he would share all the readings and information about his health with the Awakening Administration. His condition had greatly improved, so he would be able to be discharged in a few weeks. Suho thanked the doctor for being able to talk to him. After all, he was the first person he could talk to in a civilized manner after 1,000 years. The man thanked him in return for the information and left the room. Meanwhile, in the Awakening Administration building, the girl who had found Suho came to her superior to ask him why the person who had come out of the portal in the ID card had been given a rank F, which meant that he was an ordinary person. After all, ordinary people couldn't pass through to other dimensions, which meant he was an awakened person and should have been given a rank E. The principal said that he felt sorry for the kid himself, because if he had been ranked E, the government would have paid him a pension. The girl asked how that was the case. The man replied that maybe he had not been in the portal at all, but had just wandered around and passed through it when he caught his eye, and then handed the subordinate his medical records. It indicated that the patient, Park Suho, was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and among his symptoms were cognitive impairment and mental disturbances, sometimes acting like a wolf, and as if he had trapped himself in a vast imaginary world, presumably confusing the real world with an illusory one due to unusually high stress. As treatment, he was prescribed selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, risperidone. The supervisor said that PTSD is common in F-class returnees. The girl pondered the wolf behavior clause, for in their first meeting she had really seen him as a true predator. Afterward, she took a packet of documents from her boss's desk and told him that she would hand them over to the returnee herself. Suho, who had lived in the other world for 1,000 years, had been in the hospital for 2 weeks. A tray of food was brought to him, and he began to eat with his hands, as his beast behavior had never left him. At this point, the head of the research team came to him, and he began sniffing the blonde, saying that he had smelled her before. She explained to him that she was the first person he had met when he came out of the portal. He licked the tray of food, and then the girl spread out the paperwork in front of him. The patient asked the girl what the awakened authority did, but she resented him for talking to her too informally. The guy replied that he was 1,000 years old. That's why he talks like that. The Awakening Authority is a government body that helps returnees like him to adapt to society. She handed him various brochures and contracts, and asked him to read everything carefully and then sign each page. The young man sniffed the pen carefully like a beast, saying that he had not held one of these for 1,000 years, and was amazed that people still used them. And then he began to draw wolves on the pages together with his signature. The girl asked him if he had learned how to draw in that dimension, but he said he knew how to do it before. The girl then asked him if he had learned anything in that world, but as luck would have it, he had just gone to the animal world, where things were relatively quiet and peaceful, and there were only battles over territories. But as he realized, other people went to the demon worlds when they got magical powers and artifacts to fight the undead. The blonde girl hummed after learning that the guy had only been running around the forest for all of 10 years. But Suho looked at her with wide eyes, and said that it wasn't 10 years he had been there, but 1,000. The girl told him that he was delusional because he disappeared in 2015 and came back in 2025. She then gave him his personal information with his ID and told him to find his family and return to them. It turns out that time was different in that world, and while he had lived 1,000 years there, only 10 years had passed on Earth, and most importantly, his family was still alive. Suho mentally said goodbye to everyone. He thought that if he could return home, but all his friends and family would already be dead. And after returning, he had to accept the loss of the forest family he had spent 1,000 years with. And so again, he had no choice but to despair at the realization of his loneliness. But he worried in vain, for he had a place to go and a home to return to. However, his joy waned a bit when he read that his mom and dad had died the day he disappeared while opening the monster dungeon. But still, his brother Junho, who had a birthday at the time of the disaster, survived. Suho ran with all his legs to the doctor's office. The nurses were unable to stop the patient, and he clutched the doorknob in his hand so that it was dented with his fingers, and rushed into the office, begging the doctor to help him find his brother. The doctor listened to the patient, but said that he could not let him go, as he was not fully recovered, and it would be better if he told his brother everything, and the latter himself came to visit him in the hospital. But then the savage said threateningly that he was asking for help, not permission, and decided for himself that he was leaving the hospital. Then the doctor realized that it was pointless to obstruct, and called a cab for Suho, telling the driver Junho's address. When he said goodbye and drove away, the nurse asked the doctor why he had personally paid this guy's hospital bill, and bought him clothes and paid for the cab, since usually F-class repatriates are given to the Awakening management. But the doctor replied that he just enjoyed hearing this guy's stories, and such unusual cases were extremely rare for him. Afterward, he asked the nurse to call a worker to fix the doorknob, and then the girl marveled at the crumpled metal. While Suho was riding in the cab, an emergency message was broadcast on the radio. It said that today, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon in Gangwon-do Province, Hongcheon County, in an unprotected field, a flood of monsters rushed in due to a miscalculation in the timing of the opening of the dungeon portal. Consequently, the Ministry of Defense decided to activate the Armored and Aviation Divisions. 50 minutes after the start of the operation, it was announced that the situation had stabilized. However, from their side was not without losses. 2 tanks were damaged, and 12 people were killed, including awakened and military personnel. After the news, a report began about a wrestling championship between a fighter dubbed the Russian Bear and an athlete from Japan. Without listening to the commentary of the fist fight, the young man reflected on the fact that the world had changed a lot in the past 10 years after all. The cab driver said that if he were an awakened man, he would ask for his job and go into the field to fight monsters too. And then the young man asked him if there was really a hunting zone in Seoul. Then the cab driver realized that he was taking home a difficult patient, and he really didn't know anything, but the ride was boring enough, so he decided to tell him everything. 10 years ago, not only in Korea, but all over the world, a gateway to another world opened. That day was called the Day of the Great Catastrophe. After the first collision of dimensions, worlds merged and monsters from other universes invaded Earth. 10% of the planet's population died that day. Since then, these gates have been appearing everywhere. The police and military could not stop them on their own, so in places where there was little or no army left, mercenaries began to be used. People who disappeared during the Great Catastrophe but returned, as well as those who had awakened, received hunting licenses or mercenary licenses, and then formed various guilds and began to hunt in fields and portals, making money from killing monsters. This was how the modern world was. Suho asked how to get a hunter's license, but the cab driver only laughed in response and said that it required an inner power to be awakened, which was extremely rare and random. They arrived at the place, and getting out of the car, the guy walked to the house, where on the second floor an elderly woman was washing a window. He looked at the old woman, and without formality, addressing her as you, demanded that she bring Junho. The woman resented the young man's tone and told him not to be impertinent, and that there was no Junhong here. Suho already thought that he had come to the wrong address, but he heard the little boy and the old woman talking about how the bad uncles had come to see them again and wanted money from his daddy. So the savage went to the mailbox and pulled out receipts and bills from there, which showed that his brother had a lot of debts hanging on him. The boy told that woman that his dad was working around the clock, but still couldn't pay all the debts. When could they be together? Suho realized that the woman took him for a debt collector, so she did not tell him about his brother's whereabouts. And then he thought about the fact that in the wilderness, the law is force, but in the human world, the law is very complicated. But most importantly, the tool to control others and his own wealth was nothing but money. So he must help his brother. Suho made his way to the Awakening Administration building and handed in his documents at the front desk. The receptionist told him that his application for the mercenary license exam was rejected because he didn't have enough qualifications. The guy asked why he was rejected since he was an awakened F-class. The woman said that he was indeed classified as such, but he lacked the 4 points needed to obtain the awakened level. Suho said that he had passed through the gate, and the girl chuckled, because a normal person would be torn to pieces when passing through the gate. Not believing the young man, she asked him to fantasize at home, but still told him that he could earn points in the field after he enrolled in the Awakening Academy. He left the building, not understanding their enrollment system, because to become a mercenary, you needed points to level up. But to level up, you had to hunt, which was only possible if you were a mercenary, so it was a vicious circle. He saw an advertisement on the fence of the Suwon field that gave 500,000 won per goblin killed, so he decided to go there to get the missing points and earn money. Suho got into a cab that drove past a high concrete wall, and then the guy asked why areas of the city were enclosed by walls. The wall was located around the center of Seoul, and its layout could be seen on a special map app on his phone. Seoul was divided into 12 districts, and there were over 100 inner gates and a few dozen outer gates leading into the fields. Hearing this, the guy thought about the urgent need to buy a phone. They arrived at gate number 27 and got out of the car. The young man went to the entrance of the closed area, without a personal car or any equipment. He went to the checkpoint, where the military men were standing, and they asked him the purpose of his visit, to which Suho replied that his reason was to hunt. The military asked for a mercenary license, but the guy didn't have one, and then the soldiers indignantly said that ordinary people were not allowed to enter. At that moment, the military men behind the wall began to shout to their comrades to urgently close the entrance. But they were too late. A car flew out of the entrance, and then the soldiers began to fire at the escaped goblin who had climbed out of the car. While the military surrounded the monster and fired at him with machine guns, they did not notice how the guy escaped. They thought that he chickened out when he saw the monster, and didn't check the field to see if he had passed the checkpoint at the moment when those standing at the post were distracted. Suho walked across the field and felt the changed air and sounds. He climbed higher and saw that only abandoned buildings remained in place of the city. All such areas looked like this now, and the other cities on the ground were also abandoned. He thought about the fact that he would need his car, and afterward, he waited for night. The sky was studded with stars, and he felt the familiar darkness. Hunting time had begun. He jumped from the roof of the building to the ground, and felt his body heavier than in that world, and his strength was less. He tried to jump up, and barely managed to hook the last phalanges of his fingers onto the roof of the apartment building. It was probably a side effect of the teleportation, since he had been able to jump much higher before. He began to sniff around for the scent of goblins, and smelled them not too far away, deciding to clear the nearest side of the neighborhood. There, underneath a covered parking lot, several monsters slaughtered the unfortunate white dog with their spears. It was very similar to the leader of a pack of red wolves, and Suho decided to protect the poor thing. The dog was bleeding, but continued to glare at the monsters, and then Suho shouted to the goblins that they were now his game, and began to smash their skulls with his strong fists. Suddenly, a characterization panel appeared in front of him, and a multitude of announcements and an error signal flooded the young man from all sides. A system error was interfering with the guy's combat, shutting him down, and he tried to brush the panel off with his palms, asking it to disappear. He thought maybe there had been a glitch, due to his power becoming drastically lower than it had been in the other dimension. He killed all the goblins, staining the entire space around him with pools of blood. The young man looked at the panel again, but it was displaying a fatal error, so he couldn't see his level, and accordingly thought that he hadn't been able to increase his points during the battle. The last time he had seen this panel was 100 years ago, after his body had been hardened to its limits, and since then the notification of strength increase had never appeared again. But now his level had dropped, and he had to start from the beginning, and the system had been unable to recover from these failures for a long time. However, a status bar opened up to him, and the achievement store was now open. Without realizing what it was, he clicked on the store and found a bun and a bottle of water in his inventory, clicking on which immediately got them tangible in his hands. He only had 7 points, but having gained such admission, he realized that he was now finally awakened. He then approached the unfortunate dog, who, weakened, was lying in its own pool of blood. Beside it sat a little white puppy. He began to examine the dog, and the dog, in animal language, asked the man to take her child to him and take care of him, as she had not long to live. The guy tried to cheer up the dog, but it still died. He gave the puppy a bun and gave him something to drink, and then dug a grave for his mother, and stuck in a cross made of twigs. Afterward, he pondered how he would deliver the goblins, and finally tied all the corpses into one big lump with the ropes he found. When morning came and the hunters' vehicles were passing through the checkpoint, Suho was walking out of the exit in the wall, dragging the goblin corpses on his back, with a small puppy walking beside him. Everyone there was shocked. How could a guy drag them on his back and finish them off with his bare hands? He carried the monsters to the awakened control building and made his way to the front desk, where a female employee was doing the calculations to pay him. He received 350 for the 7 goblins, 60 for the 3 heliotropes, and if he subtracted 200 for the puppy's prophylaxis, vaccinations, and supplements, he ended up earning 2,060,000 won. Since he didn't have a bank account or a card, the girl handed out the entire amount in a neat wad of cash. Suho asked what heliotropes were, at which point the girl showed him a small red-colored gemstone that they took out from the goblin's chest. Such gems were highly valued and often found in the bodies of monsters. Each of such gems could differ in quality and value, so they were given additional payment of different sizes for them. The girl said that he could successfully become a first-class mercenary with such abilities, and after receiving the money in his hands, he decided to earn more money first and then register and take the mercenary exam. Park Joon-ho came back from earning money and bought his son's favorite chocolate bar and a bottle of soju for himself. He took a new part-time job where he was a driver and long-distance delivery trucker. This job was quite dangerous, as it was in the fields, but it paid much better than the jobs in the city. He was driving up to his house in a high spirits, humming tunes under his breath. But a yellow car was following him, from which the creditors got out and started beating the man, as he had accumulated interest. They hit him on the head, causing Joon-ho to fall to the pavement, the grocery bag to fly out of his hands, and a stream of blood to flow from his forehead. They then lifted him up and put him on his knees, threatening him in front of his eyes with a side-handled baton. The leader of the group clapped the baton on his shoulder and said that Joon-ho had been out of contact for too long, and they didn't like coming to his house every time. The guy apologized, saying that he was earning his debts in the field, and then handed the extortionists a stack of bills that contained a month's worth of principal, and asked them to forgive him. The boss began to count the money, adding various interest and extra fees to the amount, making the fully collected amount insufficient. Joon-ho asked for 3 days, and then he would collect what was missing. But the boss told him that the interest would accrue even faster in 3 days, and then how would he pay the money back? Joon-ho cried helplessly as the chief creditor beat him on the back with his baton. At that moment, Someone called the debtor's name, and he turned back to see a young man with a puppy. It was Suho, his older brother who had disappeared 10 years ago. He looked at the creditors with angry, menacing eyes as he watched the picture of Junho being mercilessly beaten and was unwilling to tolerate it. Junho looked at Suho confusedly and kept whispering the word, brother, unable to believe his eyes. The boss was not happy about this turn of events and asked what other brother had come to see him. But Suho immediately cooled down, and all his formidable appearance disappeared when he approached Junior, sitting on his knees, and asked if he was really Junho. Memories of the past immediately flashed before the debtor's eyes. When they were in school, classmates and other students would often be him and extort pocket money from him. And once, when he was knocked to the ground and started beating him, Suho, a high school student, was taking out the garbage from the school, and no matter how much his younger brother called out to him, he only ignored the request and just walked away. He never defended the younger one, nor did he help him. On his birthday, when the disaster happened, Junho was sitting in his apartment watching the news, which was reporting that an unidentified monster had been spotted in the red sphere that appeared with the explosion. The doorbell rang, and the teenager, along with his dog, ran to the door. At the entrance stood his aunt and uncle, who told his nephew that they had been unable to contact his parents, and now they needed to get out of here immediately to an evacuation site, so he should pack his things immediately. But as soon as they said that, there was an explosion, from which the boy flew off to the end of the corridor, along with the debris of the walls. A huge monster with several heads began to collapse the building. The aunt and uncle were no longer alive, and Junho saw huge eyes in the hole where the wall used to be. He froze, and the monster went elsewhere, leaving him alive. That day, they lost their parents, brother, and closest relatives. And even if Suho didn't die that day, but disappeared, he didn't care about him because of the elder's attitude towards him in the past. That was how he had treated him in return all these years. But now that the elder was standing in front of him, he asked him how he had survived. The young man noticed that his junior had become a grown man and had aged considerably on his face. The boss asked the debtor to remember where he was, or else from meeting his brother lost his head and did not notice anything around him. For this, Suho grabbed the man's head and slammed him to the ground. The creditor rolled on the asphalt with his whole body and crashed into the wall. Junho was shocked by his brother's behavior and his strength, and the fact that it was the first time in his life that he was defending him. The two bandits started to attack to protect the boss, but then Suho calmly grabbed the leg of one of them and broke it, throwing him to the ground. The third one was very scared, thinking that Junho's brother was an awakened one, and asked to be spared. Suho crouched down on the cortanas and put his brother's money on the ground, telling the last bandit to go over and get it. He then told him to take it and get out of here immediately. The man took the money and bowed down, thanking him for it and for being spared. The two brothers went home. The old woman looked at Suho and asked, why didn't he say at once that he was kin, though she herself had prevented the lad from telling everything the first time and chased him away. This time he addressed her politely and handed her a bag of beef. They went inside. Junho's son, named Gongwoo, was sleeping sweetly on the floor, covered by a blanket. The younger man had told the older man that his son was his only treasure, but his mother had run away, determined to start a new life, leaving him a burden. Now he worked around the clock to pay off all his debts and provide for his son. Suho offered his brother a drink, and they sat in the kitchen at the table, drinking shots of soju. Junho sighed and said that after 10 years, his brother comes back not aged a bit, and furthermore, reports that he is an awakened one. In response, the elder asked how much his brother owed, and he said that his debt was in the amount of 50 million won, but it was okay now because he had found a stable job in long-distance transportation. He got the van from his grandmother, who was his benefactor. This vehicle used to belong to her son, but he died on the day of the worldwide disaster, and besides renting them part of the house, she also feeds them and treats his son as her own. The three of them have really become a good family. At this time, Gongwoo woke up and saw the puppy beside him, and joyfully ran into the kitchen, greeting his dad. The man asked the boy to say hello to his uncle, and after saying hello, he asked to play with the puppy, receiving an approving nod and a kind smile from his uncle in return. As they played, The man said that his son had wanted to get a doggy for a long time. Suho asked him to cooperate with him during breaks from his main job. He was going to go hunting, but he didn't have a truck to transport monsters, so he asked Junho to be his hunting partner and driver.